everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Elswide, president of Mark Elswide Company, Executive Recruiters, and we've been working with wirehouse, regional, and independent advisors for 40 years. This is our beginning of our 40th year. We've been helping them. We've often thought, I know I think about it all the time. How could I do a lot more business than I've been doing? How do I really ramp things up? And sometimes people think, well, I'm just going to do more of what I've been doing, more phone calls, more meetings, more LinkedIn. That's the answer. But that's not necessarily true. And sometimes it's very helpful to have an experienced and knowledgeable sales coach look at what we're doing and help us decide if that, in fact, is the right strategy. So this afternoon, that's why I'm especially delighted to have Joe Lukacs with us. He has 30 years experience working with financial advisors, working with financial advisory firms. If you go to his website, you'll see he has a lot of passionate endorsements from many of the people that he's helped over the years. So thank you for being here, Joe, and I'm really excited to get our conversation underway.
Mark, I'm excited to have the conversation. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking at our some of our attendees, and I'm like going, okay, I know a lot of these names, so I want to also acknowledge, Joe and Chris and Curtis and Darren, and a lot of the guys I've known for many, many years to take the time out of their busy day to join us inside this conversation.
All right, that's great. So thank you, Joe. So let's jump in. I guess my first question is, how did you ever become a financial advisor coach? I mean, I doubt that in high school or college that was a dream of yours. How did that come about that you became a coach to financial advisors?
Well, after I finished my MBA in Harvard, then went for Stanford
Hmm.
for my PhD in like crazy things, which is not true actually. So everything in life, there's the plan of life and then what life gives you, right? And so
Hmm.
I would love to tell you it was like one of those very well thought out stories and very intentional. And the
Hmm.
reality is it was the exact opposite of intentional. It was just totally happenstance. I went to work for Tony Robbins back in the very early 90s, 92, 1992 to be exact. And at the
Hmm.
time I lived in New Jersey. And if everybody knows geography, what's right next to New Jersey? Manhattan, right? And,
Hmm.
uh, and
Hmm.
so they needed somebody to cover lower Manhattan. And what do I know? I said, yeah, I'll raise my hand. And I took the train in, Lilly into World Trade Center at the time. And my world was very much like a wholesaler world where we sold, and a lot of people don't realize this. Tony Robbins, while it's all about, personal power and the big teeth and the infomercials and the firewalk and all that other jazz, there was a whole nother division of his company, Robbins Research International, that did corporate training. So that's the side I was on. So we used
Hmm.
to sell sales training and influence training back then to the stockbroker world, quite frankly. And we sold
Hmm.
personal development programs to the stockbroker world. So it was just basically I was there. If I was lived in San Francisco, I probably would be doing
Hmm.
tech companies, right? Or
Hmm.
anything like that. So it's just one of those things where that's how I really got my exposure to. I like to call it the predecessor industry because that world does
Hmm.
not exist anymore today in our space, obviously, for the most part. And I just found it to be a real passion of mine. And I think what really drove me to really want to specialize with advisors, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of, I mean, you can coach anything really, is that it's tangible, right? So like if I was
Hmm.
coaching a middle manager at Walmart, maybe they make an extra bonus, maybe they don't. It's not going to change their world. But when I can work with
Hmm.
an advisor and they're doing $300,000 of production, and then 10 years later we're doing $3 million of production, well, that's going to change
Hmm.
somebody's life, right?
Right,
So,
right,
so that's why I found it to be. That's why I love this game because it's tangible, it's measurable, and you can't BS it. The results are there or they're not there. Period.
right. And also it gives you the opportunity to be a high impact player, right?
Correct.
Really make an impact in someone's life when you take
Hmm.
them from 300,000, to a million or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
You've dramatically changed their lives.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's my jam. I like that.
How did you get to the title? I mean, the title of our webinar, basically, how do you double your income if you're a financial advisor? It's
Yeah,
not what you think. How did
yeah.
that come about?
I had to go do I was asked to do a talk earlier this year for a group, and I'm always thinking like, okay, the last thing I want to do is something that's been done over and over again. And I really started to think, and it was a good time of year because the end of the year, I just gotten done with business planning for my clients. And I think some of you guys were actually part of that live stream who are here today.
Mm,
I stumbled upon a lot of interesting distinctions over the last couple of years, which is basically, I think the industry a lot of times thinks that certain things need to be in place in order to really grow your game. And I think a lot of times we end up putting a lot of energy into things that may or may not yield us results while
mm-hmm,
ignoring the things that I know to be true. So I wanted to talk, and this is going back to the other conversation, which we'll do here. A
mm-hmm,
lot of advisors think in order to continue to grow their game, it's about doing more.
mm-hmm.
Like
Right.
I gotta work. I'm gonna get up earlier. I'm gonna work harder. I'm gonna make more calls. I'm gonna ask for more referrals, and all those things are not. I'm not gonna be dismissive of those, but it's not the main thing. And this is where and this is where our industry kind of preys on advisors, like on the marketing side and on the business development side. If it was as simple as, and this is an example I like to use about names, if
Mm-hmm,
tripling your business was as simple as these two things, go bring in a practice management system, stroke the check, hire the consultant or coach, install that, and go get a marketing system, stroke the check, hire the entity, run the program. If that's all it would take to triple your
mm-hmm.
business, everybody would do it.
Right.
Everybody would do it. And yet we all know, in fact, some of you guys here today, part guest here, know that's just not true. That, you can bring in all the systems you want and all the social media and all the other things. And I'm not saying it won't move the needle. I'm not going to say it won't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to give you that. It's not going to give you that breakout.
Right.
And because if it was the case, everybody would just stroke a check and everybody would be super successful, right? And we just know that's not true.
Right.
So so there has to be more to the story than that, right? And that's really what we're here to discuss today, which is, well, what is the story? Like what
Right.
really, when you really boil it down, what does it take? And that's why we put it's not what you think. It's not about doing more. It's not about working
Mm-hmm,
harder. It's not about
mm-hmm,
bringing in more systems or another silver bullet to solve a problem. Everybody's business is a reflection of who they are
mm,
personally and professionally. And this is not the fun conversation, right?
mm-hmm,
Because at the end of the day, your current bank account is 100% a byproduct of your past psychology, identity, and mindset. So if you want your future bank account to be greater, i.e., double, right?
mm-hmm.
It's not going to be found in more systems and more silver bullets. It's you have to evolve as a human being. And
Right.
this is what kind of the framework that I've put around it now, where there and this is the
Mm,
way and this way I start every one of my intro conversations. So an
mm-hmm,
advisor comes into my world, and usually by referral, and
mm-hmm,
oh, so tell me a little about your business, stuff like that, right? And I say, oh, I'm doing about half a million, $1 million. Like, great. Well, so let's say $1 million. Well, hey, tell me where you want to be in 3 to 5 years. Well, I want to be doing 2.5 to $3 million. That's okay, great. Well, I know what the $1 million version of you looks like. That person's right in front of me right now. What does the $3 million version of you need to look like? Because as soon as we can unlock that, then that
mm,
$3 million will become a reality for you. And that's why it's not what you think it is, right? At the
right.
end of the day, like I said, I know some of the guys here, so it's kind of a good story.
Mm-hmm,
And Mark, you've been at this game a long time too, so it's a really good thing to do. If we all were
mm-hmm,
to jump back in time to let's say it's 2025, so 2015, 10 years ago,
mm-hmm.
are you the same person professionally you were 10 years ago?
Of course not.
You've evolved, right? We all have,
Right.
right?
Right.
Right?
We should.
So what we're saying here is evolution happens no matter what. What
Mm-hmm,
I'm saying is instead of making it happenstance
mm-hmm,
and subject to, What would happen if we could intentionally control that evolution
Mhm.
that gives us the opportunity to mold ourselves,
Mhm.
right, into
Mhm.
the next version of who we need to become in order to pull off our goals?
Mm.
And that's not sexy. That's not a system, right? You just can't stroke a check and buy it.
Right.
You gotta design it and you gotta live it. And that's
Mm.
uncomfortable for a vast majority of human beings.
Yeah.
But that's the way the game is played. You know, I say the man or woman gets there first, the
Mhm.
bank account follows behind it.
Hmm.
And that's for a lot of advisors, they never really thought of it in that framework before. But whenever I
Mhm.
play the game, I go, well, go back 10 years. Tell me who you were back then and what your business looked like if you were in the business 10 years ago, right? And where you are
Mhm.
today. Well, then it's not a question, are you capable? Look what you've done without realizing you did it, right? So what I'm
Right.
saying is take the next step, but do it intentionally. And I've worked client, and I know this works because we've done it. And that's how you get there. It's not, like I said, it's not a system thing, it's an identity thing.
Right. So in other words, is it kind of like an evolution of personal traits when you say identity? I wonder if you could just kind of
Oh, yeah, let's unpack that. All right.
expand that on that a bit.
Yeah, so most human beings tend to live in the past. So in other
Mm-hmm.
words, they look backwards and they live there. And in our space, it's normally not a good place where we think about our past failures, our past
Mm-hmm.
rejections. Very few people wake up celebrating, right, the way they need to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you live in the past, it's like the old saying, like if you're trying to drive forward and looking in the rearview mirror, bad things can happen. So I
Mm-hmm.
think first thing you have to do is you got to look at your past, and I'll share a very personal story. So I've been doing this
Mm-hmm.
now 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
When I hit my 25th anniversary, I
Mm-hmm.
had this real kind of epiphany, come to Jesus moment, where I
Mm-hmm.
asked myself a kind of a key question, which is, okay, you've been doing this for 25 years. Is
Mm-hmm.
this the way you want the next 25 years to go? And
Mm-hmm.
and at that time I was like 50, 54, 55. And where most people are kind of thinking about calling it a career after 25 years, it's a long time to do anything.
Yes.
I said, no, I don't want the next 25 years to be I don't want my last 25 to define my next 25, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I had to really think about, well, what does my past mean to me?
Mm-hmm.
Because what most people will do in this game will go, "Oh, I wasted all that time. I
Mm-hmm.
squandered those decades, right? I didn't apply, I wasn't my best." And all that's going to do is disempower you and like make you not in a good place. So what I did is I
Mm-hmm.
said, "You know what? I'm going to look at the last 25 and I'm going to say that was all preparation for the next 25."
Right.
Like that was just my version of very well paid, but practice. And all
Right.
that did is situate me for my next move, my next thing. So the first piece of this is you've got to look at the past and understand that no matter where you are, you learned, you got experience,
Right.
you got reps, right?
Right.
Even though you may not have accomplished what you set out to do,
Right.
it doesn't mean your game's over. That's the first thing, right? So the first
Mm-hmm.
thing, identity is to frame the past. Second piece of
Right.
identity is understanding who you need to become. You are who
Right.
you are today. And this is what most people do. And I saw this vividly this past business planning cycle where I have clients do 10, we do 10-year, 3-year, 1 year. We kind of file a little bit like an EOS model to be
Right.
congruent with it. And
Right.
so if I've got a client doing, let's say, $1 million this year, like last year,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and their 10-year vision is $5 million top line, right? Or maybe higher.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What the fatal flaw human beings make, forget advisors,
Mm-hmm.
is they look at their tenure, but they filter it through their current version of who they are. And the
Mm-hmm.
brain goes, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you say to yourself, hey, I don't need to worry about that right now. What I've got to figure out is who I need to become to get that done. Um,
Right.
I said this in a kind of just tongue in cheek, but it really resonated with people. I said, your current self will never solve future self problems. It's not capable of doing it. But
Right.
yet we try to have it solved and then we get frustrated. Oh, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if I want it. And so, in other words, we talk ourselves out of our future and we'll stay in our present. because we know it. It's
Mhm.
comfortable, right? I mean, it's
Mhm. Mhm.
limiting, but it's comfortable nevertheless, right? So,
Mhm.
so that's part of it is understanding that who you're going to be tomorrow is not who you are today, especially if you do with intention. So that's the first thing of
Right.
identity. The next
Right.
piece is standards. Like,
Mhm.
what do you expect out of yourself? Like, what are your standards? Your standard, like who
Mhm.
you serve, relational minimums, right? Income minimums.
Mhm.
Like, in other words, somebody said, well,
Mhm.
Joe, how do you elevate? A lot of times it's just by raise your standards on what you're willing to do, who you are, who you're willing to deal with, right? What your time
Right.
is worth. And as a byproduct, you end up kind of going in the direction that you want to go, right? But I think the
Mhm.
key thing is don't never, because I fell victim to this for a while. Never let your past define your future. And like I lived
Right.
that for a couple of years. It sucks.
Right.
Like
Right.
I wouldn't wish that on anybody, quite frankly, especially. So that's part of it, right? Is
Mhm.
identity, is raising standards, and then I think a lot of guys, and again I use guys. I know there's women here too, obviously. If you ask me, one of the core challenges I see with most advisors who want to do great
Mhm.
things but yet struggle to do it
Mhm.
is there's a narrative that they have, spoken or unspoken, where they question whether they're good enough, do they deserve
Mm.
it,
Mhm.
right? Am I worthy? And that's really the truth for a lot of us, right? Because if you have, because here's the bottom line: if you haven't failed out of the business yet,
Mhm.
well, you haven't succeeded what you wanted to accomplish. That not a question, are you capable of that? You
Mhm.
just haven't figured out how to unlock yourself to go do it yet. That's
Right.
the bottom line. And
Right.
we get, and as an industry, we get diluted with, oh, we're the next marketing thing away, right? Or we're the next system away. And we're not going to do it here, but if you talk to advisors and say, hey, have you ever invested in a practice management thing or this thing or that thing? Most of them will say yes. I said, did it help you? Yeah, it helped me a little bit.
Right.
Very rarely going to say, "Oh yeah, it gave me my big breakthrough." Like I was able to
Right.
double my business in 3 years, and it totally changed how I look at things. It's a tool, right? So,
Mhm.
so, so that's where. But it's easy. It's easy to buy stuff. It's easy to acquire tools. It's much more
Mhm.
challenging to do the work on yourself to
Right.
to get you to where you want to go, right? So I think
Right.
that's a big gap in the industry that we don't like to talk about because it's a little nebulous, maybe a little woo woo for some people. But
Mhm.
ultimately, in my experiences of 30, now 31 years, it's
Mhm.
it's the closest thing to the truth that I've found so far.
Yeah. So actually, it's a very positive way, number one, to look at the past. That the past is basically a learning experience, right?
Yep.
Setting you up to move forward, and that
Yep.
the power to change has to do with your own commitment to personal growth and
Hmm.
recognizing where you need to grow.
Hmm.
So, so for advisors who want to really evolve and grow, I mean, what are some of the things they really need to be focused on? One sounds like um, freeing yourself and kind of capturing the right kind of personal identity going
Hmm.
forward. But what are some
Hmm.
of the things you'd recommend that an advisor who wants to grow should start to think about?
Well, I think first off is, I think it's a four-part process, right? So I think the
Mm-hmm.
first thing is, okay, what's the target, right? So we talk about
Mm-hmm.
growth like in this global nebulous way. And so,
Mm-hmm.
number one, and this is where and we'll talk 30 seconds on goal setting as part of
Good.
this, is
Mm-hmm.
that what most advisors do is they do two things and they both are wrong. Number one, they'll be very vague with if I can just do a little bit better than last year, I'm good, right? I don't know
Right.
what that means, right? Or they'll
Right.
say, I want to do X amount of dollars. I say, okay. And that's wrong too. And people are like, what do you mean that's
Mm-hmm.
wrong? What do you mean
Mm-hmm.
that's the way we do things? I go,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many variables in the world. And the example I like to use is this.
Mm-hmm.
You open up your email and inside there's a message. Hey, I was referred to you by one of your clients.
Right.
That person could be a $500,000 relationship. It could be a $5 million relationship. That we just don't know
Right.
the variables, right?
Right.
There's who shows up and how much money they have. That's a variable. There's the
Right.
market variable. Do we have a good market, sideways market, down market? There's the how
Right.
much money do my clients take out variable. There's how many of my clients died this year variable. right?
Mm-hmm.
So to sit
Mm-hmm.
there and say to yourself, I'm going to set a single goal that's a number and it's a pass fail is doing you a
Right.
massive disservice. So what we do is we talk about minimum acceptable then brass ring. So like
Mm.
for example, if somebody did $750,000 last year, I'll say, well,
Right.
what do you want to do? What do you want to do this year? And they'll throw a
Mm-hmm.
number. I say, well, does that represent the minimum, the median, or the brass ring? We need to
Right.
clarify that. So,
Right.
they may say, hey, at a minimum, I want to do 800,000. My top line would be $1 million. And what's funny
Mm-hmm.
about that, they won't write a million. They'll write like 985,000 because mentally they
Mm.
can't put the extra digit on the back end of that thing. It's a weird thing. I've seen that for
Interesting. Interesting.
many decades.
Hmm.
So then I'll go to them. I'll say, okay, what number are you focused on every morning? Are you looking at the the 850 number, or are you looking at the $1 million number? Because that matters, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
brain, we all have to remember this. Our brains are massive problem-solving vehicles. So if
Mm-hmm.
I ask it to solve the $850,000 problem, it will solve it for me, but it won't solve the
Right.
$1 million problem because I'm not asking it to, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so that's so that's part of it. So number one, be very precise with your goals in the range. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, and this is massive, why? So if somebody says to me, "Oh yeah, I want to do $1 million," I say, "Great. Why is it a must?" Because
Mm-hmm.
if you can't sell me on why it's a must to you, you haven't sold it on yourself why it's a must to you. And
Right.
and I call that the pull. There's push motivate. There's push and pull. The push
Mm-hmm.
is motivation, effort, right? Discipline, sucking it up, and that's great. And we all need that, but it's
Right.
fleeting. It's not, it's when you have it, it's great, but there are some days you just don't have it. All right.
Right.
The
Right.
pull, which is 10 times stronger, is the why, is the mission, is the commitment. It's doing things when you don't want to do them. That's got
Right.
nothing to do with motivation. That's all everything to do with commitment, right? And this is
Right.
where and this is where a lot
Right.
and this is what drives me crazy of my a lot of people like will confuse me. Oh, Joe, you're like one of these motivation coaches. And I always quite frankly piss me off because I don't do motivation because that's like sunburn. It's fleeting. I'm about
Mm-hmm.
strategies and about pull and about getting you committed to what you want.
Right.
So the why. So the what, the why. Next, the
Mm-hmm.
who. Who do you need to become to pull this off? Because it
Mm-hmm.
can't be the current version of you. Because if the current version you could have pulled it off, it would have already pulled it off, right?
Right.
So there
Right.
has to be some. So this is so, and then the last one is how we're going to do it, right? Or the what we're going to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
The what.
Mm-hmm.
Most advisors, here's what they do. Here's my goal. Here's what I'm going to do. They don't look in the
Mm-hmm.
middle. The why and the who, right?
Right.
And
Right.
these are 80% of the power in doing the process. And
Right.
and that's why like even I go back decades, sales managers, right? Hey, what are you going to do next year? Everything was on a spreadsheet. How much production are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
There's no thought. And that's why a lot of advisors got turned off to doing business plans and
Mm-hmm.
goals is because they lacked the emotional meaning. It was just a bunch of numbers. And it
Right.
wasn't, it didn't, a bunch of numbers is not going to get you up in the morning when you don't want to get up to go to play the game. It's just not, right?
Right.
So
Right.
this is part of it. So when we're setting frames up, on
Mm-hmm.
what we're going to accomplish, that's my questioning. All right, why is this the must? Who do you need to become the how we're going to do it's easy. I've in my entire career, I can take anybody's what they want and map it out. How many new clients do we need? You went like that's those are math problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
The juice is the why you want it, and then the who you need to become to go get it. Right? That's the
Right.
juice.
Right. And I guess who you need to become, that's like where commitment comes in, right? Because you're not like a novelist that's waiting to be inspired to generate, to write a great book. You're someone like Jerry
Mhm.
Seinfeld who has X number of hours every day, whether he's in the mood or not. He sits
Right,
down and writes jokes.
locks himself in a room
Yeah,
until he writes. That's right. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
commitment, right? That's
right,
that's got nothing to do with motivation, right? Because
right,
a lot
right.
of those days he's not motivated to write, right? He's
That's
committed to
right.
writing. Different, right? From
Exactly.
that perspective.
Ex
And I think that's where, a lot of times, we get caught up and we think that this game is all about sunshine and motivation and being inspired. And trust me, they're all good things. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, you'll be motivated. Look, there's nothing wrong with being motivated out of fear. And I mean that. Like a lot of people think well, why can that be?
Mm-hmm.
I am more motivated. My biggest fear, and I'll share this with everybody to give context.
Uh-huh.
My biggest fear in my world is when my game is over and I look back at my life and I call it the
Mm-hmm.
rocking chair test. I'm sitting on I
Mm-hmm.
visualize this. I'm on a porch. I'm sitting
Mm-hmm.
back. I'm still breathing, right? And I'm looking back at my career and I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
back at all the things that it could have been, but yet it
Right.
wasn't. That freaks
Right.
me out. And
Right.
so my inspiration is more about avoiding a negative outcome than the
Mm-hmm.
pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And it's fun. I mean, that's what works for me, right? So
Right.
I operate it's and as long as it's not debilitating, and for me, it's not. It's like the opposite. Like gets me like I
Mm-hmm.
gotta go.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really crucial. Most advisors don't understand that this is mostly a psychological game, not a game of
Mm-hmm.
designations, not a game of like at the end of the day, like I said earlier, your bank
Mm-hmm.
account is a reflection of who you are. So like who you are today equates bank account. Who you need to
Mm-hmm.
become tomorrow will equate bank account. If you're
Mm-hmm.
not willing to evolve, then why would you expect your bank account to evolve? And I'm not saying it won't move here or there, but
Mm-hmm.
I watch people in their 50s and 60s like literally double their business on the backside of their career because they finally figured it out, right?
Right.
Like it all clicked in finally, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's beautiful. And then there are people I talk to that get referred to me, and like I just had one a couple months ago. Like, Joe, I'm
Mm-hmm.
63 years old. I want to do this for another 10 years. You can't teach this old dog new tricks. I go,
Hmm.
you're right. Because the dog
Mm-hmm.
says because you believe you're the dog and you don't learn, like, yeah, what would you like me to do with this, right? And it was a
Right.
nice conversation. It's a heartful conversation. And I think he kind
Mm-hmm.
of went off. I spoke the truth. He didn't like it. But it's funny, like a couple of weeks ago, he reached back out to me. He said, look, I've given a lot of thought to what you said.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that you can't teach an old dog in a trick. I said, that's right. I said, you
Right.
gave up on you. Nobody else
Mm-hmm.
did, right?
Right.
Because that narrative, remember, we as human beings seek comfort, we seek certainty, and so we'll create these narratives in our minds that kind of keep us safe. I call it caveman thinking, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except there's no more
Mm-hmm.
saber-toothed tigers or anything out there.
Hmm.
But if you think about it, it holds us back. And how does it hold us back? Simple stuff. Like most of you guys here, and I know some of you, so I know your businesses to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why aren't you 100% referral centric? Why aren't we getting all the assets from our clients? Why aren't we being, why do we care what other people think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're afraid that, oh man, what other people may think, or I don't want to be perceived as a salesperson. Like they put all these
Mm-hmm.
narratives in their head to keep themselves
Mm-hmm.
safe. And what they don't realize is that's what holds you back. The people that make, and I'll just use an example, because I work with some of these, and I'll share this. The people that are
Mm-hmm.
on like the Barron's list and all this other jazz, trust me,
Mm-hmm.
they're not smart. Anybody here, and I mean this sincerely, they're not any smarter than you.
Mm-hmm.
What they figured out is how to channel this at a higher level and to evolve into something, right? That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the bottom line. And I see this over and over again. It's intellect. Look, in our space, intellect is important. So I'm not going to say it doesn't mean anything. But as an
Mm-hmm.
industry, we tend to overvalue it. It's overweighted. Where the
Mm-hmm.
emotional aspect of it, you mastering you,
Mm-hmm.
is woefully undervalued. And that's the difference, right?
Right.
It's just not
Right.
something you just can't solve it with stroking a check. That's the problem.
Right. So the key challenge is really an internal challenge in terms of adopting the right attitudes. And I can see where an image, having a mental image, that one day I'm going to be sitting on a rocking chair on my porch. I'm going to look back on my career, and
Mhm,
I'm going to feel was an also ran. I'm really not
mhm.
going to be happy or satisfied, rather. I can
Right,
see that as being a very I can see that as being a motivating image. I wasn't the best that I could be, and
right.
I don't have another
Exactly.
shot.
That's right. Unless you believe in like reincarnation and another life, maybe you come back. Yeah, and that's what
Right,
that's what gets me up in the
right.
morning is avoiding that scene, right? And I use that as
Mhm.
fuel, right? To
Yeah.
really do what I need to do. So call it whatever you want to call it, negative motivation, negative inspiration. I don't care. I mean, I just
Mhm.
know it works for me going forward, and that's really what's critical.
Yeah. Well, it's a type of visualization, but I guess it's a very motivating image saying, gee, I want to work very hard. I'll take a slightly nicer vacation because I'll make more. Like, so what?
Well, look, I know we're wanting. Look, I appreciate everybody being here, so I'm gonna indulge everybody for another 5 minutes, if I may. Um, so one of the other things I think is really important about getting that back to doubling your business, right, is
Uh-huh.
that understand that the pace of growth is going to be 100% tied to your ability to be uncomfortable in this game. So if
Mm-hmm.
you think
Right.
about, there's no free lunch here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can all go back to, that's why I say our past is valuable to us if we look at it in the right context, right? Like there was
Mm-hmm.
a time, and everybody's here, and like I said, I know some of the people here that you didn't even know what a financial plan was. Like you didn't even have your license yet, right? And like you didn't have client one, and so you were totally had no capabilities, no confidence, quite frankly, no competence, but yet you're here years later because you pulled it off, right? So if
Right.
anything, that should give you solace and confidence that if you pulled that off in your past, you're capable of pulling off your big future game because you're
Mm-hmm.
better at it because you've had experience doing it, right? And I think that's really important. And the goal here of this game, and I know, like I said, some people here, like is unless you really are desired to, like never retire, like that's
Mm-hmm.
my mantra, and some of you guys know this. Like, why
Mm-hmm.
would you want to retire if you can play the game? We're not airlines pilot. We're not airline pilots. We don't have a mandatory anything. So why
Mm-hmm.
not? I always say your last year needs. In my world, your last year is your best year.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Right.
there's no mountain here. A lot of people think, oh man, once I get, and we all played this game in our career. Once I get to this income level, man, I'm good. Then you get there, huh? it's uh it's not so much basically it's not enough, and the next. So what I've realized is if you ever feel like you got to the tip of the mountain, it's a bad thing. That means you're not climbing the biggest mountain you can, right? So
Right.
I think you always want to be focused on playing a game always, and not just expand to make more money. Money's just a resource, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
think what a lot of advisors do is like human nature is they get to a
Mm-hmm.
certain place, and it's a dangerous place called the comfort zone where they're
Right.
making enough money, they can
Right.
take the vacays, the kids are good, maybe they're out of the house by now, and you're kind of in this place and you kind of lose your why, like what's next. And I think that's a dangerous place because a lot of muscles then start to atrophy, mental muscles, emotional muscles,
Mm-hmm.
and you start feeling like the backslide. That's why I never accept when somebody says to me, Joe, I just want to do what I did last year. It's the wrong answer. I don't
Right.
accept that. Right? Grow.
Right.
It's all saying grow or die, and I mean that. I don't
Right.
care if you take the money and burn it in the backyard. I don't care, but we're going to grow. That's the mantra here,
Right.
right? Go for it.
Right.
I
Hey,
think I think we have, I think we have a question. Do we have a question mark in the question box?
yeah, let me look. Yes, we do. Well, one question is that I see here, which I think you've partially answered, which is how do you know if you're an advisor? How do you define success? I mean, because part of what you're saying is just growing I know growing in and of itself
Yeah.
is a very happiness generating activity. But when you look at
Mhm.
advisors and when you coach advisors, how do you help them define success?
Yeah. So we have a very cool game, and here's
Uh-huh.
what I'll say. Show me another business, another profession that you can have both time freedom and economic abundance. Show me another
Hmm.
profession. It doesn't exist. I've
Right.
looked.
Right.
So now, does that mean that everybody gets it? No, because you have to set the game up to win that game, right? It's a different game.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
so to me, if I had to put a label on success, it's number one. It's really those two things: economic abundance and time freedom, which is you're making more than enough
Hmm.
money to live your life the way you want to. You're giving away money to charity and your passions, right? From
Right.
that perspective, You're spending time with your family. You're going on your trips to vacation. You're totally sustainable. You almost feel semi-retired at some one level, right? Where you're kind of doing things like
Mhm.
that, and you're and not saying that like this is not all sunshine and roses. There's always issues. It's called compliance. We know that,
Mhm.
but you love your game and you never want to quit it because it gives you the two things you want most. And look,
Right.
most people got in this game, if you really were to interview them, hey, why'd you become an advisor? Freedom. I don't want to work for a
Right.
boss. I want to have control. And
Right.
yet a lot of advisors never realize that freedom because they build their business around just effort all the time and they create it's a well-paying job, but it's a job. It feels like a job, right? It feels like that.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I've always said this is the worst paying job you can have, or the best business you can ever own. And
Right.
but it's two different things, right?
Right.
And a lot of advisors default into, and I think in a career cycle, I think the first 5 years is all about hard work and effort and energy and getting kicked and getting up, and you have to put your time in.
Mhm.
There's no shortcut there.
Mhm.
But a lot of advisors stay there the entire career where they're every year it's a startup for them. Like they're like,
Mhm.
30 years later, they're still like trying to figure out how to get to 300,000 or trying to do this. Like
Right.
you've had a quarter decade, a quarter century, excuse me, to figure out this game and you never evolved. You're approaching it like you did 30 years ago, and that's why it's not working. And unfortunately, there are a lot of advisors who, it's going to be what it is, are going to end their careers, and they're going to be in their version of the rocking chair, and they're not going to like what
Mhm.
they see. There's not,
Right.
unfortunately.
Right. Let me take just two more questions. Let's see. Um,
So,
Here's one. What's your view of the 80/20 rule? How do you it's kind of a popular rule. What
yeah,
do you
yeah.
think
I mean,
about that?
I think Pareto rule law. I think Pareto's law is a real thing. I don't think it's some hypothetical weird thing. Um, so I think when you start, and I think it's different in a cycle, right? So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, I have this kind of that's I call philosophy, like a better word. Like every advisor starts out, they have three identities: the advisor identity, the business owner
Mm-hmm.
identity, and the entrepreneur identity, right? And I don't care what your
Mm-hmm.
business card says, you have those three identities. And what happens is that when you begin, you're really the advisor. Like, I got to make it happen and stuff like that. But as you
Mm-hmm.
grow and build your business out, now you take on more business owner tendencies. You take on more entrepreneurial identity, if you will. And what happens is what's 80/20, like in the first 5 years, what's the 20% that drives 80% of our results? Marketing, business development, right? That's where we've got to spend
Mm-hmm.
our time. And then
Mm-hmm.
hopefully we evolve. We're still doing business development, but now it's different, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
your 80/20 is always going to be shifting as you go throughout your entire career. And just as a simple rule,
Mm-hmm.
there's only two kinds of things we do in this business: things that make us money, and then everything else. That's it. So it's very, very, very binary, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and I think a lot of advisors are masters of their 80%. What's 80%? Watching CNBC, like that's going to make a difference in your world. Reading the internet, like that's going to make a difference. Like, oh, I got to be up on the news. Oh, are you a hedge fund manager? I didn't know that. Good to know, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
they use these distractions as the illusion of productivity,
Right.
where
Right.
what's their 20%? Talk to your clients, make sure they're happy, follow up on your prospects, right? Check in with your
Mm-hmm.
COIs. I mean, those are the 20% activities that will yield you the results. Which one's more comfortable? Surfing the internet, watching TV is way more comfortable for human beings than getting on the
Absolutely.
phone and calling somebody or sending an email or video or something like that. And that's what happens, right? So how advisors, what I call, check out of the game and still remain
Mm-hmm.
in their office, is that's
Right.
what they do. They surf the internet, they do stuff like that. It's all they call it sometimes research,
Right.
BS, just doing busy work to have the illusion of
Right.
something.
Yeah.
And because they're not compelled, they have low physical, mental, emotional energy,
Mm-hmm.
and they've not set themselves up to win the day. The morning sucks. They start the day wrong, and they wonder why they're just doing okay. Well,
Yeah.
because that's all you expect, because that's what you set yourself for. You set your and when I say mediocrity, just so we're all on the same page here, mediocrity is still making six figures a year. That's what's beautiful about this
Mm-hmm.
game. You could be
Mm-hmm.
pretty mediocre, and I just with utmost respect. You could be a
Mm-hmm.
pretty mediocre player and still make 100, 150, 200,000, $250,000 a year in this game. It's that powerful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But imagine if you harness that power and got super functional, it's seven figures. That's the difference between a six-figure person and a seven-figure person is really, it's about identity, standards, and how they play. That's it. It's not about intellect. It's not about the Rolodex. It's got nothing to do with that long term. It's really
Right.
got to do everything with what they're going to do, right? And how they want to
Right.
push.
Right. So it's actually kind of what what you've really discussed, being committed to doing the right things, whether they're fun or not. It's a lot easier to say I'm a brilliant analyst. I have to watch, I got to stare at the screen and,
Yep.
figure this and figure this out.
Sure. Sure.
And
100%.
I remember when I was starting out as a recruiter, it was a guy that I used to talk to many years ago. But that's the reason he washed out of the business. He was always looking at patterns on his
Yeah.
desktop and how they were
Yeah.
changing, but he didn't do anything. He didn't talk to his clients enough. So let's take one more because we're kind of
Yeah.
running low on time.
Okay. Let's do it.
Let's see. So here's one. If I was going to start one action tomorrow or after this
Hmm.
webinar
Yeah.
to really help me grow my business,
Yeah.
what would you recommend?
It's not going to be what you think. So here's what I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
Control the first hour of the morning. Like
Hmm.
if you don't have your morning ritual dialed in, and we teach an 8-step protocol. Some of you guys, I know Curtis, Chris, Brian, Ryan, a lot of you guys know it. Um, you don't control the first hour of the day. You're not going to control the day. It's irrelevant. Best laid plans of mice and men done.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's so foundational. Own the morning. You own the
Hmm.
morning. You control the day. You don't own the morning. You don't control your day. What does owning the morning mean?
Hmm.
Here's what it doesn't mean. It does not mean you start the day with the news. It does not mean you start the day with email. Those are other people's priorities and other people's problems. You
Hmm.
want to start your day getting you ready to go execute at a high level. And I can't get into it because we'll be here till 6 o'clock, so I won't get into all the
Hmm.
protocols. But
Hmm.
there are, if you go on my YouTube channel, there are videos about morning rituals and how to get that done and what really works for advisors and things like that.
Right. But the idea sounds like it's making sure you execute on what's
Hmm.
important to you to
Yep.
grow your business. And that's really what you have to be committed to, not
Yep.
not being distracted and giving yourself the illusion of working hard. So
That's
um
right.
yeah. So listen, Joe, I really want to thank you a lot. I really got a lot out of our conversation. I'm going to actually watch the recording myself.
Cool.
So give myself a lot of time to digest it. It has some tips for me as well. And yeah, for everyone who registered, we'll be getting out the recording to you very shortly. And Joe, I want to thank you again very much for being here and wish everybody a great rest of the day. But no, this had a lot of really good insights for me, and I thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Me too.